Imagine opening up your monthly electricity bill, and it doesn't just say zero. It actually says that the power grid owes you money.
Right, which sounds impossible, but
Exactly. But imagine the government completely re-engineered the financial system to, cover the upfront cost of the infrastructure to actually make that $0 bill a reality.
yeah.
So welcome to this deep dive. Whether you are prepping for a high-stakes exam, maybe a policy meeting, or you just want to understand the mechanics of these massive governance shifts, this is your ultimate analytical toolkit.
Today we're unpacking PM Surya Gar the Muft Bijli Yajana.
And what's fascinating here is that on the surface, this just looks like a standard environmental subsidy program, right?
Yeah.
Put solar panels on roofs, reduce carbon.
Sure, the usual green energy pitch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you really look under the hood, it's actually a massive structural shift in how the country handles energy poverty, localized economics, and even geopolitical supply chains.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, this isn't just about clean energy. It's about fundamentally rewiring the relationship between the citizen, the financial sector, and the traditional power grid.
Okay, let's unpack this because, the sheer scale of the ambition is the first thing that jumps out. The stated goal here is the electrification of 1 crore households.
Right, 10 million homes.
10 million.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, that's roughly the equivalent of putting a solar plant on every single home in a medium-sized European country.
It is a staggering logistical target, truly. The policy was officially launched on February 13th, 2024, but the real story is how quickly it moved from just a policy announcement to ground-level implementation.
Yeah, because government schemes can drag on for years.
Oh, absolutely. But throughout 2025, this transitioned into a massive operational phase. And we aren't just looking at projections on a whiteboard here. The data shows that by March 10th, 2025, they had already completed over 10.09 lakh installations.
Wait, really? Over 1 million in that time frame?
Over 1 million households already integrated into the system. And the capacity target is set at up to 3 kilowatts per household.
Okay, but I'm looking at these upfront costs, and they are, frankly, brutal. The exact demographic this seems geared toward, middle and lower middle class families who would benefit the most from eliminating their utility bills. They're exactly the people who usually don't have thousands of dollars sitting around to install a 3-kilowatt solar array.
Right, exactly.
So how do they actually afford this? It seems like a massive disconnect between the policy's target audience and the physical cost of the hardware.
Well, that is the exact friction point that kills most residential green initiatives globally. The traditional approach is just offering a post-installation subsidy.
Which still requires the homeowner to front the cash.
Exactly. And the architects of this scheme recognized that and built a highly integrated financial mechanism to basically bypass it entirely. Yes, there's substantial central financial, direct government subsidies for systems up to that 3-kilowatt capacity, but the real lever here is the financing. The policy facilitates collateral-free bank loans of up to 2 lakhs for these households.
Wait, collateral-free? Banks historically despise unsecured loans, especially when lending to lower middle-class demographics, where risk models are notoriously strict. How do you convince 12 public sector banks to just, open the tap on collateral-free capital?
By entirely removing the typical risk associated with consumer loans, the banks are offering this at a highly concessional interest rate of 6.75%. But the genius of the mechanism is how the repayment is structured.
Right.
It's designed around an equated monthly installment, or EMI, that perfectly aligns with the household's electricity savings.
Okay, let me run the math on this to see if I have the mechanism right. Let's say a family normally pays $1,500 a month for their electricity. They take this collateral-free loan, install the 3-kilowatt system, and their monthly utility bill drops to zero.
Correct.
But instead of pocketing that $1,500, they take the money they would have given to the power company, and they use it to pay the EMI to the bank.
That is the exact loop. It's an EMI-neutral design. So the household isn't taking on some new burdensome debt that eats into their grocery budget. They are simply redirecting an existing non-negotiable expense, their energy bill, toward owning a physical income-generating asset.
It's essentially a self-funding energy loop.
Yeah.
I love that. You basically bypass the psychological barrier of, taking on debt because the household's monthly cash flow doesn't actually change at all.
Right. They just swap a utility payment for an asset payment. And
Yeah.
once that loan is paid off, they own the power generation entirely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a textbook example of aligning microeconomic incentives with macro-national goals. I mean, you can't ask a family struggling with inflation to care about national carbon emission targets,
Oh,
right?
for sure. It's an impossible sell.
But if you tell them, hey, we can eliminate your electricity bill without you paying a massive upfront fee, they become active participants in the climate transition purely out of economic self-interest.
That sounds brilliant in theory, but I've looked at massive government subsidy schemes before, and the bottleneck is almost always the bureaucracy.
Oh, the red tape.
Yeah. You need a bank manager to approve the loan, an inspector to verify the roof, a utility worker to connect the meter, a government clerk to release the subsidy. I mean, it's a recipe for a 6-month administrative nightmare.
Oh.
How do you process 10 million of these without the whole system just grinding to a halt?
You have to remove the human choke points. The policy mandates an end-to-end digital delivery system. The entire life cycle, the application, the approval from the local distribution company, the loan sanction from the bank, and the final subsidy transfer. It's all digitized and automated through a central national portal.
So they essentially built a digital pipeline to bypass the traditional legacy bureaucracy.
Precisely. And the key performance indicator of that digital pipeline is speed. Once the installation is physically completed and a digital commissioning report is generated, the subsidy is transferred directly into the beneficiary's bank account within 15 days.
15 days. Wow. In the context of government infrastructure subsidies, getting cash into an account in 2 weeks is practically light speed.
It really is.
And I imagine that speed is what actually builds consumer trust. If your neighbor sees you get your panels installed and your subsidy clears 2 weeks later, they're far more likely to apply themselves. You create a viral loop of adoption based on, well, administrative efficiency.
It creates immense momentum. But as that momentum builds, it introduces a completely new problem. If you're instantly creating a guaranteed market for 10 million solar arrays, you need an astronomical amount of hardware. Which brings us to the geopolitical dimension of this policy.
Right, because if you suddenly need 10 million solar panels, the fastest and cheapest way to get them is to just import them from the massive established manufacturing hubs overseas.
Yep.
But if you do that, you're just trading one problem for another. You stop relying on imported fossil fuels, but you become completely dependent on foreign supply chains for your actual grid hardware.
And that is a strategic vulnerability no modern economy wants. This is where the scheme heavily intersects with the concept of Atmanet Herb or the drive for strategic autonomy and self-reliance. The policy strictly mandates the use of domestically manufactured solar modules and cells. You simply cannot get the subsidy if you import the core hardware.
That is a massive industrial lever. By locking that subsidy behind a domestic manufacturing mandate, the government is effectively using these 10 million households as a guaranteed customer base to artificially force the creation of a local supply chain.
It is industrial policy disguised as environmental policy. I mean, solar cell manufacturing is capital intensive and incredibly competitive globally. Local manufacturers historically struggled to scale up because they just couldn't compete with subsidized foreign imports.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So by guaranteeing this enormous domestic demand, the government drastically lowers the risk for local manufacturers to build new factories, invest in new technology, and actually scale up their operations.
They're essentially crowdsourcing the industrial base, which means this scheme isn't just about putting panels on roofs. It's about building the factories that fill the panels. And that naturally bleeds into the economic data we saw regarding job creation.
Oh, the projections are massive. The scheme is estimated to create 17 lakh direct and indirect jobs in the green energy sector.
17 lakh jobs. And when you think about the mechanics of rolling this out, it makes total sense. That isn't just factory work. You need localized logistics networks to transport these fragile panels.
Right.
You need local electricians trained in solar inverter integration. You need maintenance crews. You are essentially creating a new decentralized trade class in every district of the country.
And those jobs are serving an initiative that directly attacks energy poverty. We mentioned the $0 bills earlier, but the specific guarantee of the scheme is up to 300 units of free electricity per month for these households.
300 units is a very specific threshold. That covers the foundational energy needs of a standard middle or lower middle class home, right? Like lights, fans, a refrigerator, a television, maybe some basic cooling.
Exact.
By eliminating the cost for that baseline, you are drastically altering a household's disposable income.
It functions almost like a universal basic income, but delivered through energy savings. But the policy goes a step further. Once a household system covers their own 300 units, they have the ability to export any surplus power they generate back to the grid.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for your notes. This is the pivot from saving money to actually making money.
Exactly. The household transitions from being purely a point of consumption, a drain on the grid,
Okay.
to becoming a unit of economic generation.
Mhm.
They earn credits or direct income for the power they provide back to the state.
So if we pull back and look at the macro targets for all of this, what is the ultimate climate and infrastructure goal the government is trying to hit by the end of this rollout?
The timeline anchors on March 2027. By that point, the program is projected to add 30 GW. That is 30 gigawatts of solar capacity in the residential sector alone.
30 GW just from residential roofs.
And the corresponding climate impact is a projected reduction of 720 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions.
720 million tons. To hit those kinds of numbers usually requires building massive centralized mega projects, right? Like damming huge rivers or building miles of offshore wind farms, which take a decade of environmental clearances and billions in corporate capital.
Yeah, and this raises an important question about how we fundamentally view infrastructure. Historically, power generation was a one-way street. A massive centralized plant burns coal or splits atoms, and it pushes that power out through thousands of miles of wire to passive consumers at the end of the line.
But this scheme totally shatters that model.
Yeah.
If you have 10 million households suddenly generating their own power and pushing their surplus back into the wires, the grid isn't a one-way street anymore. It's a complex two-way nervous system.
And that is the concept of the prosumer. These households are simultaneously producing and consuming. When the sun is shining, they are power plants exporting energy. At night, they draw from the grid. This unprecedented decentralization of power generation is arguably the most complex challenge for modern electrical engineering. The grid has to constantly balance the erratic input of millions of individual roofs.
Which means the government isn't just upgrading roofs. They are going to have to fundamentally upgrade the intelligence of the entire national power grid to handle all this two-way traffic.
It's a forcing function for modernization, and it perfectly encapsulates why this specific policy is such a dense, interconnected piece of governance.
Right. So here's where it gets really interesting for your notes if you're taking this into an exam or a strategy briefing. Let's convert this into a 150-word answer structure blueprint. So for the intro.
You'd want to define PM Suryagar as a digitally driven, subsidized residential solar push, aiming for that 1 crore home target.
Exactly. And then for the body arguments, we break it down into 3 pillars, right?
Yeah. Pillar 1 is financial viability, highlight the EMI neutral setup and the 6.75% loans. Pillar 2 is governance efficiency, mention that 15-day digital subsidy delivery to show ease of governance.
And pillar 3 is the strategic economic impact. This is where you underline keywords like the domestic manufacturing mandate for Atmari Bharat and the 17 lakh jobs.
Spot on. And for the conclusion, you frame it as a dual-purpose tool. It achieves both Atmanirbhar energy security and massive climate goals, specifically that 30 DW by 2027 target.
Perfect. So underline integrated financial mechanism, end-to-end digital delivery, collateral-free, and energy poverty. Okay, let's hit our final revision capsule. We need a rapid-fire 30-second summary. What are the 5 must-remember facts?
All right, Fact 1 launched February 13, 2024. Fact 2, 1 crore household target with 10.09 lakh done by March 2025. Fact 3, 300 free units of electricity. Fact 4, up to 2 lakh loan at 6.75%. And Fact 5, 720 million tons of CO2 reduction.
Love it. And the probable exam question you should prepare for. Analyze how the PM Suryagar Yojana integrates digital governance and financial engineering to achieve India's climate and energy security targets.
That is a very likely angle.
So what does this all mean at the end of the day? We talked about this massive shift from a consumer to a prosumer. For decades, the narrative around green energy was that it was a luxury, something you adopted if you could afford to care about the environment.
Right.
This policy flips that narrative entirely. It makes green energy adoption a matter of immediate economic self-interest for the lower middle class.
It proves that you don't have to choose between inclusive economic growth and aggressive climate action. By offering up to 300 free units and a clear pathway to zero electricity bills, the state has effectively crowdsourced its national energy generation and its 720 million ton carbon reduction goals.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative reality to mull over. As these 10 million households physically alter the landscape of the power grid, becoming independent, decentralized nodes of energy production, they're actually gaining a form of physical independence from the state utility monopolies that have defined modern living for a century.
It's a huge shift.
So the question for you to explore is, how will that newfound energy independence, this massive army of active prosumers, permanently alter the economic power dynamics between the average citizen and the centralized state in the decades to come. It's a fascinating shift in the balance of power, both literally and figuratively. Keep analyzing, keep connecting those dots, and we will catch you in the next briefing.